Hello dear students, welcome to Bajirao Ias Academy interview guidance program. So in this lecture we are going to discuss about the United Nations. This is a very important topic and this topic is very relevant for the exam point of view. So this is in news because recently United Nations has celebrated 78 years of its establishment. So if you remember, United Nations was established in the year 14th October 1945. Okay, so it was established in 24 October 1945. So however, because of this reason, United Nations has been widely is in news. So apart from that, countries like India have been batting for the multilateral reforms. Okay, multilateral reforms. Now as part of the multilateral reforms, UN is at the center. Because why UN at the center? UN lack relevance at the present context. UN lack relevance. Why it lacks relevance? Because UN has not been providing the representation for the countries who are more deserved to be members of the United Nations Security Council. Now what has happened? United Nations Security Council has become a club of limited nations. So on the other hand, countries in Africa and countries in Africa and countries in Latin America have not get any representation in the United Nations. On the other hand, if you look at the members in the United Nations Security Council, Europe is overrepresented. So therefore there is a need for equity and there is a need for greater representation for the developing world, especially the global south. So because of this reason and recent ineffectiveness of the UN with respect to the containing of COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war, because of all these reasons, UN is in news. Now in this lecture we will briefly discuss about few major questions with respect to the United Nations. First, we will understand why UN was formed, what was the purpose that United Nations was formed, and second, what are the major achievements of the UN so far. So it has failures also and achievements also. So we will understand what are the major achievements of the UN so far, and we will also briefly discuss some failures of the United Nations, and along with this we will also understand the relation between India and UN in a very brief manner. Right, so before discussing all those things, first we need to understand some basic facts with respect to the United Nations. So we all know that United Nations was established in October 24, 1945. So in this year United Nations was established. So however, there was a treaty that was signed in San Francisco. Okay, a treaty that was signed in San Francisco by 51 member countries, and that include 5 permanent members. Okay, so that includes 5 permanent members. So all these countries have signed a treaty, and then the United Nations have come into existence, or United Nations has come into existence after signing this San Francisco Treaty. Now as of now in the United Nations there are 193 member countries. So the headquarter of United Nations is in New York. Okay, New York, United States of America. So if you look at the composition of the United Nations Security Council, the Security Council consists of 5 permanent members. Right, so it consists of 5 permanent members plus 10 non-permanent members. Now here we need to understand the basic difference between permanent members and the non-permanent members. So permanent members are having a permanent membership in the United Nations Security Council. On the other hand, 10 non-permanent members are appointed or elected for the temporary period of time. Okay, so their membership is temporary in nature and they are elected for the 2-year term. So another major difference between permanent members and the non-permanent members is that the permanent members used to enjoy the veto powers. On the other hand, the non-permanent members will not have any veto power. Right, they will not have any veto power. So these permanent members are US, China, Russia, UK, France. So in order to protect the interests of these countries and the interests of their allies, what they are doing, they're constantly using the veto power. constantly using the veto power against any resolution. So thereby what has been happening, any resolution which has been introduced, whether for the good purposes or any other purpose, so they are not coming into the force because of the extensive use of veto power by these permanent members. So that is where it becomes a key question that leads to the ineffectiveness of the functioning of UN. So however, it contains following official languages. So what are those official languages? Arabic, French, Chinese, English, Russian and Spanish. So these are the 6 official languages of United Nations. So apart from that, UN also has some of the main organs. So what are those organs? First and foremost, we need to talk about the General Assembly. So General Assembly is the main policy making body. It is main policy making body of the United Nations. So followed by the General Assembly, we also have the Security Council, right? So this Security Council is the implementation body. The decisions or the policies made at the General Assembly will be implemented by the Security Council. So Security Council is considered as one of the most powerful body of the United Nations. So even though it is a most powerful body, UN is considered as largely ineffective. Why? Because the UN Security Council is used for pursuing narrow political interests of those respective countries. And after that, it also has Economic and Social Council and Trusteeship Council, International Court of Justice and UN Secretariat. So these are the main organs of the UN, and we will also understand them in a brief manner in the later part of this lecture, the main organs of the United Nations. Now next, why UN was established, why it was formed, what was the purpose of establishing the United Nations. So we all know that UN was established for the purpose of maintaining international peace and security. Okay, so maintaining international peace and security is its foremost or supreme objective of the United Nations. So the methods through which it can ensure international peace and stability is through diplomatic and the political means, right? So it essentially means that it promotes diplomacy and it also promotes the political cooperation between different countries so that it could effectively maintain international peace and stability at the global level. Now if we can understand the past of United Nations, earlier there was League of Nations. Earlier there was League of Nations that was established for the purpose of ensuring international peace and stability. However, one thing that you have to understand here, that this League of Nations was established after the end of World War I. Okay, so what is the objective of League of Nations? To prevent another major world war. So however, we all know that in the year 1939 there was a second major world war, and with the outbreak of the second major world war, we can largely consider that the League of Nations was failed to fulfill its objective. So therefore, it has not just failed, rather the League of Nations has clearly highlighted that there's a need for new reformed organization, and that could promote the global peace. So what is that new global organization that could be more representative, that could be more reformed, and that representing the global realities? So that is UN, United Nations. So however, the other thing that you have to understand, at that point of time, so Britain was known as a hegemony. So however, the position of Britain has been constantly declining. On the other hand, the other powers such as US and USSR have been rising. So this virtually has created two poles in the world. Not just two poles, these two countries have become rivals to each other. So this has led to the emergence of a new world order centering around two blocks or two poles. So therefore, there is an imminent need to establish the United Nations to ensure international peace and security, right? So countries earlier, they used to dominate the world affairs, suffered a great deal after these two world wars. Okay, so not just these countries. For example, Britain had suffered a lot because of these two world wars. And after these world wars, as I have already told you, US and USSR have been emerging as new superpowers. right? So therefore, in fact, US and USSR looked at each other as rival powers. So after that, there was a charter called Atlantic Charter, and this Atlantic Charter had outlined the ideal goals of war. So this was not a treaty, but this was actually an affirmation that paved the way for the establishment of UN. So subsequently, there was a UN charter that was signed, and this was not a treaty, rather this was an affirmation by the major countries, and that ultimately led to the formation of or establishment of the United Nations. So this is the brief background about the establishment of United Nations. Now in this context, we will understand what is the specific role of India in the establishment of the UN. So please remember, UN was established in October 24, 1945. So at that time, we were still under the colonial rule. So even though we were under the colonial rule, when we got our independence, the independent India started supporting the United Nations. So in fact, India viewed its membership in the United Nations as an important guarantee for the maintaining international peace and security. So this essentially means that India has a lot of confidence over the United Nations that it could ensure, it could maintain international peace and security. However, now India is disappointed because UN largely becoming an unrepresentative body of the most of the countries. It has not been representing the realities of the 21st century, and because of this reason, India is largely disappointed on this. So however, when we talk about the Second World War, so Second World War started in the year 1939 and ended by 1944. Right? So post-war, United Nations finally came into existence on October 24, 1945. So this was ratified by the 51 countries, and among these 51 countries, there are 5 permanent members as well. Okay, so the permanent members are France, Republic of China, Soviet Union, UK and USA, along with 46 other signatories. Okay, so at present there are 193 member countries in the United Nations. So in this context, we will briefly understand the main goals of the United Nations. So what are the main goals? What is the purpose for which the United Nations has been established? The first most important goal, for this reason the UN has been established, is maintenance of international peace and security. Okay, so it is tasked with maintenance of international peace and security by various efforts, taking up different efforts at the global level. So after that, it very often develop the friendly relations among the nations, so thereby essentially preventing the conflicts among different nations, when UN plays an instrumental role in promoting the friendly relations among the different countries. And at the same time, it achieves the international cooperation when it comes to solving the international problems. So when I say international problems, what are the major international problems? For example, terrorism is an international problem. Okay, so climate change is also an international problem, and apart from climate change, environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, human rights violations, so all these things are considered as the international problems. So in this case, what UN do? UN will cooperate with the member countries or cooperate with the international community in ensuring a possible solution for these international problems that different countries and the people have been facing. So apart from that, UN will also become a center for harmonizing the actions of nations, right? For example, in order to tackle these issues, the governments across the world will take different efforts. So in this context, what UN do? UN will become a center for harmonizing all these actions by different countries. So therefore, they will achieve the common goal at the global level. So these are the main goals of the United Nations. For this purpose, United Nations has been established. Now, so as I have already told you, there are certain organs of the main organs of the United Nations. So these are considered as the principal organs of the United Nations. First, General Assembly. Okay, so General Assembly is essentially a policy making body. So all 193 member countries are part of the General Assembly of the United Nations, and it is essentially a policy making body. Okay, so it takes decisions on the important issues. However, the power to implement those decisions lies with the United Nations Security Council. Now, if you look at the membership composition of United Nations Security Council, It consists of 15. It is a 15-member council, as I have already explained you that it is a 15-member council, and 5 members are permanent members. They also veto wielding members, and 10 members are non-permanent members. They do not have any power. However, the major responsibility with respect to the maintenance of international peace and security lies with the United Nations Security Council. Okay, so apart from that, the other major responsibilities of the Security Council include the threat existence and encourages the parties which are actually involved in a conflict to come at or to settle the issue in a peaceful manner. So these are the general responsibilities of the United Nations Security Council. So after that, there is also another agency called Economic and Social Council. So this is particularly a policy making body within the UN. So that makes policies with respect to economic, social and environmental issues across the world. So however, if you look at the composition of Economic and Social Council, it consists of 54 members, and these 54 members countries are elected from the General Assembly for a term of 3 years. Okay, for the period of 3 years they will be elected from the General Assembly. So there's a trusteeship council, but the role of the trusteeship council is a very minute in the overall UN functioning or working. So we can say that it has lost its relevance, and it is an outdated body that was established for another purpose. Okay, so after that we can also talk about the International Court of Justice. So this is also considered as the principal organ of the United Nations. So this is responsible for settling the legal disputes submitted by the states and answering questions in accordance with the international law. So if there is any issue between two different parties, then the parties would approach the International Court of Justice, and International Court of Justice would settle the issue as per the international law. So if you look at the location of this International Court of Justice, it is located in the Peace Palace, Hague, Netherlands. So this is the only principal organ of the UN not located in the New York. Okay, so this is not located in the New York. So after that, we should also talk about the Secretariat. Okay, so where the Secretariat what is the function of the Secretariat? So generally Secretariat is made up of the Secretary General and the UN staff. Okay, so they used to carry out the day-to-day affairs of the United Nations. So Secretariat is located in New York, USA. Right, so these are all the principal organs of the United Nations. So after that, we should briefly talk about the major achievements of the UN so far. So what are the major achievements of UN so far? So ban on nuclear weapons, or otherwise called as nuclear non-proliferation. Okay, so this is otherwise called as nuclear non-proliferation. So in the front of nuclear non-proliferation, UN has a major role, I can say, because for the nuclear non-proliferation, there are non-proliferation treaty and comprehensive test ban treaty that were signed by different countries, even though India was not part of NPT and CTPT on the conditions that they were discriminatory in nature. The number of countries signing NPT and CTPT, UN had played an instrumental role. So apart from that, UN has also passed a resolution to eliminate the nuclear weapons in the year 1946. So therefore we can say that now world is safer because of the role that was played by the UN previously. We all know about the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the world came very close to the another major world war. So however, all these organizations have played a very important role during that particular time. So for the protection of health, in the year 1948, World Health Organization was established by the UN. So the specific reason for establishing the World Health Organization at that point of time to deal with the communicable diseases, for example smallpox, malaria and HIV. Okay, so it used to deal with those communicable diseases because they were rampant at that point of time, and they used to affect people in the developing countries in those times. And you have to understand that at that point of time there were no medical or health facilities that were developed that we are observing now. So therefore World Health Organization was also established. So it also provides a kind of a refugee relief, refugee assistance. For this purpose, in the year 1950, UN created High Commission for Refugees. So in recent times we have seen this refugee crisis from Middle East and even from Afghanistan. So therefore UN provides assistance to those refugees, and it also protects the rights of the refugees in this context. And the World Food Program, if you know about this World Food Program, so this World Food Program also provides food to the people who have been facing hunger, malnutrition, and they're considered as the displaced people, and for them World Food Program under the aegis of United Nations provides adequate food. And after that, for the protection of environment and climate change, reducing or preventing climate change, in the year 1972 UN Environment Program was established. Okay, so this essentially cooperate with different nations and non-governmental organizations, civil societies and local communities in improving the quality of life, and that would not compromise the future of generations. So this is more or less in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, Sustainable Development Goals or Agenda 2030, right? So after that, for the protection of law and order, in the year 2002 UN has established the International Criminal Code. Okay, so the International Criminal Code specially deals with war crimes, genocide and other atrocities that have been taking place across the world. So however, you have to understand the difference between International Court of Justice and International Criminal Court. Now in the International Court of Justice, it is a specialized organ of the UN. However, the International Criminal Court is not an organ of the UN. So other thing that you have to understand, that countries like India, Russia, China and US are not members of the International Criminal Court. So apart from these achievements, it also has other major achievements. So the other major achievements of this include UN Peacekeeping Force, establishment of UN Peacekeeping Force. Generally, UN Peacekeeping Force is being established for the purpose of protecting or ensuring peace in different violence hit regions. Okay, so there are different areas which are very often considered as violence hit regions. So therefore what it essentially do, it ensures peace and prevent the non-violence in those regions. Okay, so it prevents the violence in those conflict ridden areas. For example, we can say the best example is deployment of the peacekeeping force into Rwanda, Sudan, and India has a major contribution in this peacekeeping forces. Okay, so India is one of the largest contributor to the peacekeeping of the United Nations. And apart from that, we should also understand certain failures of the United Nations. So what are the major failures of the United Nations? So when we talk about the major failures of the United Nations, first and foremost, it is not a representative body. Okay, so that is the major allegation that is leveled against the United Nations, because it has not been providing representation to the countries in Africa, Southeast Asia and even the Latin America. So therefore it has not been representing the 21st century realities. So that is true. And secondly, it has been furthering or promoting the neoliberal ideas. Generally, do you know that the neoliberal ideas usually prioritize free markets and less government interventions. So therefore it has been significantly benefiting the countries in the global north. However, the global south have been facing the significant lot of problems because of the free markets and less government interventions. So because of this reason, there is also lack of multilateral reforms in the United Nations. Okay, so because of this reason also it has been further or widely criticized. So we can say that United Nations has become a largely ineffective body. So in the sense that, as I have already told you, because the UN Security Council permanent members, So these permanent members have a veto powers. So since they have the veto powers, they just vetoing the resolutions which are introduced, so virtually making the functioning of the United Nations is less effective. And after that, we should also talk about the funding and less powers in maintaining international law and order. So all these issues we have to talk about. And apart from that, in recent Russia-Ukraine war also, we have seen a very limited role that was played by the United Nations, and for that reason also United Nations was criticized. And in fact, when it comes to the handling of situation in Afghanistan after the withdrawal of the US was also largely criticized. So we can say that the United Nations has lack of reforms. It has not been representing the realities of the 21st century. So these were the major failures of the United Nations so far. However, when we talk about India and the United Nations, India and UN relationship, we can say that India is one of the largest contributors of the peacekeeping forces. In fact, India also is the first country which have the women battalion in the peacekeeping forces. So after that, India has also been aspiring for the seat at the global high table, that is UN Security Council. So this essentially means that India is looking for the UNSC membership. So however, the other veto wielding members are not ready to give away their veto powers to countries, emerging countries like India. However, if you look at the strengths of India, it is the fourth largest military power. Okay, fourth largest military power and third largest economy in terms of PPP terms, and fifth largest in terms of the GDP. Okay, fifth largest economy in terms of GDP. And when it is about the population, it is the largest country in terms of the population. So India alone contributes around 18% of the old population. So therefore it is a complete denial of representation to the 18% of the population. Now apart from that, India has also been batting for the more representation of the global south, and for this purpose India along with other like-minded nations has started a forum grouping called G4. The members which are part of the G4 include Germany, Japan, okay, so Germany, Japan, India and Brazil. So these were the member countries which have been demanding further expansion of the United Nations Security Council. So in recent times, India has also taken up the issue of financing, providing more finances to the United Nations. So however, ultimately what we need to do is make UN more representative. UN should be more representative, and it should represent the current realities, the 21st century realities. Otherwise it could made the fate of the League of Nations. So that is what we need to deal with. So therefore in this context, the UN should be reformed urgently and immediately, and countries like India or the emerging countries should get more and more representation in these United Nations Security Council, so that it ultimately makes those bodies more and more representative, more and more effective in protecting or ensuring the international order. Okay, so that's all for this lecture, and thank you.